I think the generalized question of, can you make a cat tutorial, is more so, can you make a tutorial showing how to convert correct anatomy into an art style that's easy to replicate? That's a pretty good topic for a video. Let's talk about character design. Hello everyone and welcome back. I hope you're having a good day. So that comment I shared was actually on my character sheet video, but I've gotten a number of different people asking questions similar to this one as well, like this one I got on Tumblr a few months ago. So I know you've talked about making distinct shapes for character design many times before, and I've been trying myself for a while now, but I'm kind of struggling with pelt pattern ideas. Do you have any suggestions on how to make unique pelts or plan on making a video on this subject? So buckle in y'all, today I'm going full your high school art teacher mode. In order to talk about this subject thoroughly, first I'm going to need to explain two key concepts that I often see young artists struggling to grasp without some kind of visual aid. So I'm going to do my best to show exactly what I mean. First, let's discuss negative space. Negative space in terms of art is, broadly speaking, the space on your canvas that isn't used. If I draw a character in the middle of my canvas, all of this outside is negative space. Canvas that has not been drawn on. Empty. Negative space. If you've taken an art class, maybe your art teacher told you to use more of your negative space, or to be careful of negative space, to try to encourage you to use the whole canvas or something similar. There's more to it than just that though. Negative space can easily be seen as this large space of nothing around the character. However, negative space also exists inside the character design as well. Let's say I decide to make this a single color character. Maybe they're all white, black, gray, orange. No matter what color I fill in here, most of this design still contains negative space. Now, negative space is not something that is inherently good or bad, it just is. Don't let the word negative trick you into thinking that you need to fill all negative space with something. You can make great art with a lot of negative space or barely any negative space at all. Or, more commonly, sit somewhere comfortably in the middle. It's just a lack of used space. And understanding how to use negative space along with shape language and composition can help bring your drawings a lot more emotion and appeal. It's worth mentioning that negative space as an art concept has a deep and wide well of uses, theories, techniques, etc. So know that while I am specifically going to be talking about character design, the concept of negative space and how to use it in art is a broad topic, along with most of the other things I'm going to be talking about in this episode. For one quick example of how negative space is used in art, tessellated art is where negative space in a piece is actually purposefully shaped to form another subject. Tessellations appear most often in things like tile work, where the repeating shapes don't overlap, but instead create a repeating pattern. You probably learned about them in math classes. But in the case of more complex art pieces, tessellations can take on more specific shapes that use negative space completely. I bring up tessellations specifically because it is just as important to be conscious of where you're not drawing as it is to be thoughtful of where you are drawing. I hope that makes sense, so I'll say it again in another way. Choosing where not to draw on a character is just as important as where you choose to draw. This applies not only to things like their basic facial features, but also any markings, clothing, jewelry, anything. And how do you know how to use this negative space in a design effectively? Here's where we've got to talk about shape variety and appeal. Shape variety is another concept that I've tried many a time to explain on this channel or my Tumblr, with probably my best example of it being when I was talking about designing for multi-animator projects. But let's get into more detail on this because this can be another one that's a little hard to grasp without visual aids. So how do you take this and translate that into art, and then turn it back into a proper character design? Many artists will start off somewhere here, or maybe over here. So then how do we take these and just give it that extra bit of polish to get it here. Learning anatomy is a big first step for a lot of artists, and then learning how to exaggerate that anatomy into something still recognizable and appealing is the step after that. And shape variety is a part of that. In the broadest sense, shape variety is about finding appealing ways to pair shapes together, and this ties back into seeing and using negative space effectively. Human brains have a natural tendency to want to make things look uniform, evenly spaced out and neat and symmetrical. Our brains recognize patterns like this, and we recreate it subconsciously. It often will lead to a lot of this kind of work. Check out the difference in negative space between this and this. When everything is uniform and evenly spaced out without a lot of variety, it doesn't give much direction for where I should be looking at this design, because the whole design sort of falls into the same rhythm. But when we look at this one, there is plenty of variety, and the shape language catches your eye, and your eye kind of moves naturally throughout the points of interest throughout the design. And, just to pause again, there's nothing inherently wrong with this. Choosing to purposefully make a very symmetrical or uniform design could be great in a lot of circumstances. Maybe you want to communicate that your character is very orderly and straight-laced. Maybe you're specifically going for this kind of design for artistic reasons. I'm not here to tell you that anything I'm saying here is a hard and fast rule and you must always stick to it or you're a bad artist. These are just broad concepts to be aware of. Art in any medium is about learning rules and tools so that you can break them with purpose and pizzazz. So, when we're talking about character design choices being purposefully made, the use of shape variety and thoughtful negative space goes a really long way. So what is shape variety more specifically? How do you learn when and where to use it? The short explanation is that big things look good next to small things, and round things look good next to pointy things, and sometimes thin things need a big round thing, or short things would look great with some tall things. It's all about contrast, when and where to use it. Sometimes doubling down on all round things is exactly what you want, but adjusting the size of all round things involved will go a long way into putting some pop into your character design. Plenty of my character designs start off with a question. Does this character make me think of triangles, circles, or squares? Maybe they fall neatly into one of those categories. Maybe they fall somewhere in the middle or outside of those shapes. But once I can answer that question, I can start designing my character. Including shape variety is all about not letting yourself fall into the comfortable pattern of, well, I always draw eyes like this, or ears like this, or paws, jaws, eyebrows, tails, wings, hands, whatever like this. It's about stopping for each feature and taking a moment to ask yourself, should my character have big eyes, small squinty eyes, maybe sad eyes? And how does that look next to this other feature of theirs? Do I give them small eyes and a big nose, or a small nose and big eyes? And you want to be asking yourself that question for everything. And again, don't forget that the contrast is super important. Let's say you make a character with all big features. Well, then you've just made a character with normal same features. If there's no contrast to compare the big and small features to each other, then everything just looks the same. Okay, so now we've touched on the ideas of negative space and shape variety. Let's talk about how to use both of these to create appeal. Not to be confused with an appealing personality, we're only looking at our aesthetics, surface deep. And also don't confuse appeal with attractiveness. For example, Quasimodo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame is designed specifically not to be conventionally attractive, but his design is still appealing. And this is something that can hang a lot of people up. Writing an appealing character and creating an appealing character design are not the same thing. The personality of your character can inform the character design, but your character's personality has nothing to do with whether or not your design is appealing. Makes sense, right? So this is the part of the video where things both get a lot more subjective and a lot more scientific. Wow. So what makes an appealing design? Well, what things do you find appealing? But if that's a little too broad of a question, we can actually use some mathematical tricks to help us out. And don't worry, I'll try to keep this pretty simple. Probably the main concept you want to be aware of is the golden ratio. 1 to 1.618. This ratio is found in a lot of nature and tends to be very appealing to our eyes. It's a very organic ratio that you've probably accidentally used or noticed without even being aware of it. And it's a core tool used in basically any design work you could think of. Architecture, character design, graphic design, you name it. I'm actually going to recommend this video by legendary character designer Steven Silver. It applies the golden ratio to several things and then brings that back around into how it applies to character design. So, using this ratio, we want to apply it to our design where we can, and bam, you've already got yourself some pretty appealing characters already. Again, creating appeal is all about design basics and learning what helps draw the eye in. It requires a lot of practice, but with the right tools and knowledge at your disposal, it can make things a whole lot easier, or at the very least get you started on the right foot. So now we've covered negative space, shape variety, and the golden rule. Let's talk about shape language. This is going to dig a little into anatomy, but also, just the general vibes. What vibes are your character giving me? And what does that tell me about your character without you having to give me their whole tragic backstory? This is using shape language. Let's take a look at some character designs from a few different things first to illustrate this concept. And you bet I'm just going to use this as an opportunity to talk about some of my favorite character designs. Okay, so most of these are all going to be Disney characters because you know what, I'm kind of basic. And they're also easy to use because most everyone is going to at least recognize these characters. But damn, give Disney credit where credit is due. Disney character designers know what they're doing 99% of the time. And they have for a really long time. So first up on my list is Goofy. And specifically, I'm thinking about his 90s iteration that features in Goof Troop, a Goofy movie, and an extremely Goofy movie. Now, the Goof Troop design differs a bit from what the movies did, but it did lay the groundwork for a very friendly and everyman dad look of Goofy here, as opposed to his earlier designs. I think that Goofy is honestly just a brilliant design no matter what form he takes, but 90s era Goofy is just so warm and friendly. Let's break down these shapes and what they're saying to us about this character just through the design. Goofy has a small round head contrasted with a big nose/muzzle and big expressive eyes. Even compared to other Disney Toon characters, Goofy has some of the biggest eyes. This makes Goofy's expressions one of the first things you'll notice about him. And combine that with the big mouth and small head, it gives the impression of a character who's, well, probably not very smart. Especially when you take into account the bump on his head, but also a character who is very sincere and wears all of his feelings directly on his sleeve. In early cartoons, Goofy's big expressive eyes could emphasize how hard he was thinking about something, and the payoff would be when he came to some sillier backwards conclusion with a big confident smile. And this expressiveness also works great in communicating Goofy as a sort of hapless but well-meaning father figure. We've got the scrawny dad bod here at work too, a nice long bean shape. And one very distinct characteristic of Goofy's design has always been his sloped shoulders and slightly hunched back. The hunchback implies a more laid-back nature, but the sloped shoulders in particular are really a distinguishing part of Goofy's character design, because it's very purposefully breaking the idea of, quote, men have triangle bodies and women have hourglass features, unquote, that you commonly see in character design. And this was undoubtedly a choice originally made to make Goofy look more effeminate and unmanly, but honestly, it just works really well as part of his design. And looking at his design overall, you can see how the contrast in shapes big and small communicate that Goofy is just kind of an awkward fella. Big feet imply clumsiness, lanky limbs, and clothes that typically fit a bit too big on him, definitely implying a sort of sloppiness or carefree attitude, or to get a little deep cut here, imply that Goofy is lower class. Or, if you look at his recent iteration, just an actual hobo probably, which is not flattering, I know, but I am just looking at the shape language and telling you what it's saying. Next up, another character design I love, Yzma from The Emperor's New Groove. This is a really great example of putting contrasting character designs next to each other to create an appealing dynamic, by the way. Yzma is small and thin next to the huge-looking Kronk. A great design pairing. But Yzma's design in itself tells us so much, and the way it is exaggerated to the extreme makes it easy to point out. Obviously, Yzma's shape language is giving us a lot of long, thin triangles and skeleton imagery. Spindly, just skin and bones. Her wrinkles, baggy eyes, and saggy deflated boobs tell us that she is an old lady. But here's where we get the real flair of this design, and that's in her costuming. Yzma wears big, expressive headpieces. She's a diva, and we know this just by looking at the kinds of outfits she wears. Things that make her look bigger, taller, and more intimidating, but always also looking high class and fancy as well. Her long eyelashes imply that she loves to take the time on herself to look feminine and regal. Again, if we pull back and look at this design as a whole, Yzma and her headdresses often give her silhouette a very elegant look. The top-heavy flare with a thin bottom that reminds me of a fan or a fancy piece of art deco. Her emphasis on her headpieces implies Yzma's ego and vanity. And then let's take a look at another villain, John Silver from Treasure Planet. God, I love this character design so much. It perfectly outlines the inner conflict he will struggle with in the movie. And while we're talking about Treasure Planet, here's a little nugget of something to think about. Dr. Doppler and Goofy share a lot of similar character design choices, but what specific thing about Doppler's shape language communicates his very different personality from Goofy's? Anyway, Silver. Just a big, intimidating, fearsome, and yet absolutely soft-looking dude. This character design is shooting straight for the stars, guys. It's got everything it needs. There's a lot of aliens in Treasure Planet, but Silver is definitely more on the human-looking side. He has just enough non-human features to make your brain kind of do a double take. And then his cyborg parts also invoke a cold, harsher, battle-worn side to him. He's got squinty, small eyes and a big nose, which, depending on the context of the scene, can either make Silver look really intimidating or make him look like jolly old St. Nick. And of course, his big belly also communicates just an overall pleasant warmth to the man. Dad bod. Everyone loves a friendly-looking dad bod. And notice how Silver's shape language changes when he goes from Jim's surrogate father figure, the cook, John Silver, to dreaded pirate captain, John Silver. The coat and the hat suddenly transform a lot of Silver's soft and round features with a more triangular, harsher shape. One more, just to get a wide range of different kinds of designs in here. Lilo from Lilo and Stitch. It might be surprising to y'all that I didn't choose to talk about Stitch out of these two, but while Stitch is a great design, I gotta talk about Lilo. Lilo is a deceptively simple design, and what makes a lot of Lilo's characterization and quirks come across so well is because her shape language clearly communicates that Lilo is just a little kid. Our proportions change a lot as we grow up, as I'm sure you would not be surprised to hear. So Lilo here is a great example of how to draw young-looking characters. Her legs are shorter than her body, her eyes and her head are large, contrasted with small hands and feet. She's got long hair, and because she's so short, that hair reaches all the way down her back. And obviously, the difference in Yzma and Lilo's proportions helps signify their very different ages. So learning how the body changes as we get older helps you use shape language to communicate the ages of your characters effectively. And of course, we can take all of these characters we've talked about and silhouette them. And even just from these silhouettes, it's very obvious who is who. Learning how to create appealing characters is also about learning how to create diverse characters. You may master the appeal of one character design, but you can't really call yourself a master cook if you only know how to make a really good grilled cheese, you know? So all of these principles are great and all, but you might be asking, how do I start practically applying this to my own art? I get these concepts, but when I go to draw, I just kind of find myself getting back into my usual patterns. A great way that I've found to begin is to just start drawing shapes, and then create characters on top of that. It might lead you to create some really silly characters, or maybe even something you totally end up vibing with. But it is a solid way to break out of your same old habits and get you to rethink about how you start designing a character. There's so much more we could go into, but I don't want to overwhelm you all with just like everything at once. So take some of these concepts and start working with them, and maybe sometime in the future we'll come back on this subject and talk about even more art rules to go over. So I hope all of these basics are helpful. Go out there and experiment with character design. Try to be aware of your negative space, your shapes, and the golden rule. I'm certainly no master at this topic myself, but we all have room to grow and learn from each other. Have a wonderful week, everyone, and stay inspired.
If you're inspo tanks, and make no mistake, you've come to the right place. Just give to Neil the time to straight up blow your mind with a new show of drawing a play.